Hello, my name is David Leslie. I'm a professor of ethics, technology, and society at Queen Mary University of London and director of ethics and responsible innovation research at the Alan Turing Institute. I'm so grateful today to be talking to you for AI for IA about advancing data justice research and practice, a project that has been undertaken by my research team at the Alan Turing Institute for the last few years. And what I'll do today is I'll offer a bit of an intro into this project, which over the past couple of years has been first supported by the Global Partnership on AI. Also, BEIS from the UK government has supported the expansion of the project, and EPSRC, the UK's Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, has also supported the work. So just to give you a basic overview of the project itself, in 2021, June, my team applied for a grant through GPay to study social justice implications of globally ramifying datafication. The project, Advancing Data Justice Research and Practice, aimed to widen the lens of current thinking around data justice and to provide actionable resources to help policymakers, practitioners, and impacted communities gain a broader understanding of what equitable, freedom-promoting, and rights-sustaining data collection, governance, and use should look like in an increasingly dynamic and global data innovation ecosystem. When we engaged the project initially, we had committed to carrying out an integrated literature review and annotated bibliography, a repository of use cases that demonstrated the ways in which civil society organizations were actually carrying out activities and practices of data justice, and also three practical guidances on data justice for policymakers, for developers, and impacted communities. And the project had initially started quite small, actually. It was just a research team of maybe 4 or 5 people. We were able to then apply for secondary grants that enabled us to take on policy pilot partners from around the globe who became our our co-researchers and co-designers of the research. And you can see in front of you, these are just some of our collaborators, the main policy pilot partners that we had. You can see that they stretched from Aotearoa, New Zealand, through to India, Pakistan, Uganda, Cameroon, Brazil, Chile, and Bolivia. And basically what we did with the partners is, as we were developing the research, our partners are basically civil society organizations who did kind of grassroots engagements with their communities, testing out and having conversations about the data justice concepts that we were exploring. And I'll talk a little bit more about the 6 pillars of data justice. And our pilot partners not only helped us develop these, but they engaged their communities to prod their intuitions about the pillars. Okay, and as I mentioned, we had quite a few deliverables or project outputs as part of the project, which we ultimately delivered in March of 2022. You can see here that it included, as I mentioned, this repository of case studies, this literature review, this annotated bibliography, and the 3 guidances. And you can see from the YouTube, the window that says YouTube on it, we also had a documentary series that we started to work on. And so far we've published 2 of the documentaries in a series of 3, and we're in the process of doing the 3rd right now. So we also had our pilot partners, those I mentioned before. They had their own kind of research reports that they published as a result of the collaboration. And these can be found on the project's website, Advancing Data Justice Research and Practice.org. And these are just excellent reports back on not just sort of critical analytical perspective of the research organizations, but also really valuable feedback from the impacted communities that they engaged. So let me now sort of run through a few main themes of the project. These are sort of conceptual strains or threads that are woven through from the beginning to end of the project. And these will involve describing first our claim that we need to sort of relocate justice. So data justice, meaning that we need to sort of take it from its, if you will, Western and global North center and kind of shift the center of gravity for thinking about data justice to a more inclusive perspective. That entails, as I'll describe in a second, three trajectories of relocation. So three ways that relocation needs to be undertaken. And then finally, the six data justice pillars are kind of the nuts and bolts, if you will, of the substantive bit of the project. So I'll go through those. So first, this kind of challenge of relocating data justice, and specifically in the decolonial context. So in the research, we really examined the sort of short history or early history of data justice studies. And as a result of that initial desk research, really came to the conclusion that we need to avoid framings of data justice that refer to a movement from the center or core to what has historically been called the periphery or the margins, right? So it's not as if advancing data justice would entail that we move from this core Western understanding of this to the margins of those that might not have been represented before. So that framing might not be the best way to sort of understand this relocation that we need to undertake. But we need to instead call into question the core periphery relationship as such, and to deprioritize the northern or northerly perspective. We need to give parity to non-Western perspective. So not a shift from core to periphery, but to give a parity of perspective to create transversal or a multi-centered dialogue about it. We need to avoid as well reverting to the types of false grand narratives of progress that have elevated that kind of core periphery model, where Western rationality is treated kind of as an ideal endpoint of historical development. That would also avoid this kind of tendency to prioritize European economic, political, and social modernization as a kind of unquestioned center of study. So following decolonial thinkers in the research, we really built on commitments to situated knowledge, to interculturality, to pluriversality, to human and biospheric connection and biocentrism, and to use all these things to advance arguments for a new kind of universality, a universality situated in that kind of pluriversal inclusiveness and orientation to equity as a kind of primitive transformative quality of data justice. So basically the way we approached carrying out that relocation is to really think about the where, the when, and the who of relocating. So first, when we talk about relocating the where of data justice, so, you know, in other words, thinking about displacing the geographical center, we might say that this simply involves shifting from the global North or Eurocentric focus to one that actively spotlights non-Western and global Southern scholarship and policy thinking. However, this problem doesn't exist only on an international scale. It really does additionally require tracking patterns of inequity and inequality within nations themselves. So in other words, we do need to think about shifting in this wider frame of global North, global South relations, but there's also internal shifts within nations and regions where there are local inequities, even within, you know, the higher income countries and also other places in the world. And so, in other words, we need to this type of where relocation needs to involve both local and domestic, local, and global levels. So relocating the when of data justice, we need to be really careful not to be information centric and not to focus on the narrow parameters which locate concerns of data justice in the past few decades of the big data revolution. For that kind of narrow time frame is liable to neglecting longer term patterns of inequity and discrimination. So, think about long term patterns of coloniality that have emerged over the last few hundred years. These are just as important when we cast the critical lens on data justice to understand how they are drawn into current data practices. So the when of relocation involves widening the temporal horizons, so to make visible slower and more subtle patterns of injustice. And finally, the who of relocation. So besides the where and the when, we need to think of the subjects that carry out both data justice research and practice. And the importance here of not just looking at scholars and scholarship on data justice, but looking at actually those with lived experience of activism and just lived experience of data injustice. That is a priority. That's really, really important. And so we in the research prioritize cognitive equity and epistemic justice by amplifying perspectives that are rooted in lived experience and civic epistemologies of individuals and communities that are affected by datafication. So let me quickly now run through finally the 6 pillars of data justice. These are power, equity, access, identity, participation, and knowledge. And each of these pillars are meant to orient thinking about data justice rather than to be like, top-down kind of principles that are applied universally to data justice concerns. They're meant to just orient paths of questioning, paths of interrogation. So power is the first. There are 3 kind of elements of the pillar of power. So first, interrogate and critique power. So question where does data manifest, or where does power manifest in data ecosystems? How does power manifest in ecosystems of information and data? Second, challenge power. So given the interrogation, analysis, and critique of power, then one needs to sort of, after lifting up the bonnet, one then needs to challenge those power relations through analysis and further critique, and also say analysis of reflexivity and the positionality of those who are critiquing. And then finally, the third component is empowerment, or empowering people. So power is not just about deconstructing relationships of force and authority. Power is also about empowering politically. There's a nice distinction that's made, I think, in Hannah Arendt between the kind of brute force type of understanding of power and the political character of empowerment. And so power has that transformative quality for us as well, that power is about empowering as well as deconstructing power. So equity, in the equity pillar, the focus is really on the transformative potential of data equity. So ensuring that when we think about equity, we're thinking about changing the world. We're thinking about praxis as a center rather than just theory. And also, when we think about equity, we're thinking about what we might call measurement justice or statistical equity, where equity manifests as avoiding the kind of single axis thinking that centers on disadvantage and that looks merely at sort of negative categorization and does the kind of math of data injustice that way. rather than doing that type of negative-centered analysis. Statistical equity and measurement justice means also looking at strengths, means also elevating those who have been subject to data injustice to a point where one prioritizes thinking about what can support them in the advancement of their interests vis-a-vis just data ecosystems. And the other bit of equity that we examine as part of this pillar is a multidimensional approach to equitable access. So commonly we think of distributive justice as the equitable distribution of social goods, obligations, burdens, and opportunities, harms and benefits, and rights and privileges. That's the kind of distributive justice kind of perspective. That then has been supplemented by what's been called representational or recognitional justice, which really looks at establishing the equal dignity and autonomy, or the equal moral status of every person, right? So that's really looking at the parity in equity of having equal recognition as a morally a valuable individual, right? So there's the distributive justice and the representational justice components. But then in the research, we also discover that we need to center first the non-ideal or capabilities based approach to social justice, which interrogates those kind of real world contextual factors that kind of are conditions of possibility for the realization of justice and human flourishing. So that's the kind of non-ideal component. And then finally, and I think probably most importantly, is to bring to the fore restorative and reparational justice as being an important dimension, which would focus on the need to right or correct the wrongs of the past by instituting processes and mechanisms for reconciliation and restitution. So that's kind of the four-dimensional approach to equitable access. You've got distributive justice, representational justice, non-ideal approaches, and restorative justice. Access. So in terms of the access pillar, first it involves prioritizing the material preconditions of data justice, as I just mentioned, and challenging formalist or ideal approaches, and also starting from questions of access and capabilities rather than starting from more theoretical kind of viewpoints, and also promoting the airing and sharing of injustices across communities through the transformative force of data witnessing, which is to say, access is about a kind of scaled transparency in this sense that datafication does allow for better data witnessing and thus better exposure of potential injustices the world over. Identity. This involves interrogating, understanding, and critiquing modes of othering, right, that will tend to create hardened identities that can be tools of oppression. And we need to be very clear in the way we approach data justice that categorization is political, and categorization can lead to modes of othering which enable social hierarchy and the formation of hierarchical organization of society. Also, identity involves challenging reification and erasure, so challenging those moments when identities are ossified or crystallized and become almost naturalized and used or weaponized and used as kind of reified ways to freeze people into oppressive relationships. And erasure, in those moments where categorization just leaves historically marginalized identities out of the picture. Also focusing on struggles for recognition and how these can combat harms of representation. So identity claims are moral claims, and there's an underlying moral grammar to claims for identity recognition, and this is a really important component. Participation is as it's intuitively meant to be. So participation is about democratizing data and data work. It's about understanding data and data subjects relationally, rather than in a way that reifies or objectifies or commodifies data and data subjects. It involves challenging existing domination preserving modes of participation, and it involves ensuring transformational inclusiveness rather than power preserving inclusion. And then finally, knowledge. So knowledge, when we talk about the knowledge pillar, we're talking about embracing a pluralism of knowledges. So semantic, epistemic, and ontological kind of ways of knowing. It involves interrogating, understanding, and critiquing the ways in which certain forms of knowledge are prioritized within decision-making relating to data. It involves challenging the presumptive authority of technical, professional, or so-called expert knowledge across scientific and political structures. It involves acknowledging that there are multiple forms of knowledge. There's, technical knowledge, there's cultural knowledge, there's narratival knowledge. There are many ways in which people understand and communicate their beliefs in the world, and we need to really focus on being as open and receptive to that plurality of forms of knowledge. Also prioritizing interdisciplinarity, so not being scientistic, thinking about the importance of all of the various disciplinary approaches from the humanities and the social sciences through to the natural sciences, pursuing strong objectivity, which is a term that comes out of feminist studies, where objectivity is achieved by amplifying the voices of those who have been previously marginalized to strengthen the objectivity of otherwise potentially biased and culturally hegemonic forms of knowing. And finally, cultivating intercultural sharing, learning, wisdom. So keeping aware that all culture, if we could even use that term, is intercultural, which is to say, within cultures, there are many cultures, and beyond cultures, there are many cultures. And so cultivating intercultural sharing involves opening up, making more porous any boundary between cultural knowing. So let me stop there. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the conference.